Shop customizable picture books that spark imagination. Get 10% off with code StorytellersShelf10 on Storyverseland.com.
Hi, storytellers. Welcome back to the Storyteller Shelf podcast. Today, we are back in our mini series, Middle Grade Marvels, where we get to know the authors behind the epic middle grade reads. And we have another special guest with us today, Sherri Winston. And Sherri, we're going to turn the camera to you. Can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sherri Winston. I am an author. I have spent the last several decades living in Florida, but I've recently relocated to the North Carolina area near Charlotte. And I write middle grade books mainly for girls. I'm hoping to add a boy book to my repertoire, so we'll see how that goes. Oh, and I do have a few chapter books as well that I'm very proud of. So, hi.
We are so glad to have you on for our podcast today. And I will start with the first rapid fire question. We'll pretend like we're on Jeopardy or something like that. But here's my first question for you. If you were a superhero, what would your superhero name be and why?
Right now, with my beginning of the year poundage, it would have to be Sherry Fluffermiddle.
I love it.
And my superpower would be the ability to just bounce on my belly and fly.
I love it.
It's awesome. I wish I had that too. Sherri, so what inspired you to write for middle grade readers, and how is it that you tap into the perspective of this age group when you make your stories?
I have wanted to do this since I was probably maybe 2 or 3. And at that time, the idea of being in middle school was like being a grown up. And then the only time I didn't want to write for middle school was probably when I was in middle school, because I wanted to write for high school and grown ups, then, of course, because I was very, very mature. So I thought. But I feel most connected with these stories. Like I've tried other ages. My very first published book was actually a YA, although in these times it could still be a middle grade, but it was a YA. And I didn't love the process. And then I shifted to YA, and I just really loved the process. I really connected with the voice and the audience, and I thought, this could be my tribe. These could be my people. Like most things in my life, it began by accident, because I didn't set out to write for middle grade, but I just sort of stumbled and fell backwards into it and learned how to make it my own.
I like that you have a variety of books, not just middle grade. But speaking of your recent book, is there a particular scene that you're proud of or that really sticks out to you?
I just visited a school group in Florida this past weekend, and the children invariably they ask this question over and a lot: how did you get the idea and everything? And I was explaining to them, as I will to you, that the book started out as a poem. Inside the book is a poem, and I actually used the poem. But it started out, I was at a function for my kids, and I was bored out of my mind. So I started working on this poem. And these words, they just sort of like stuck. And I set it aside for like weeks, but I kept coming back to it. And so I sort of built the story around the poem that's in the book. Probably my favorite scene in the book is the opening sequence, because that just unfurled like a poem as well. And although a lot of other things changed greatly in the book, that scene, much like the poem, remained pretty much intact.
That's incredible. I love hearing it when people start with poetry and it grows into something even larger. That's so fun and so creative. I know people listening are going to probably run off tonight, and even if they haven't written poetry in a while or ever, they're gonna say, "I better start in a poem because it's gonna give me a book." And you never know.
I can't promise it, but it's a good start. It's a good start because you have to synthesize the meaning and the number of words, and you have to really know the feeling is that you're trying to convey. And I think that's a trick with fiction that poets know that they are writing to elicit a feeling in this scene, in this moment. Whereas people who are writing fiction, they're so, you get so caught up in, I got to write this scene and then this scene, I got to connect them, and you keep going and you don't recognize that you've got to put that emotion, have that pause, have that breath, have that impact. And you get all of that in that condensed little story, which is a poem. So it's a great place to start.
Yes, that's a wonderful exercise. In fact, let me do a little plug right now. If we have people listening in and you are someplace where you can comment, please leave a comment, maybe the first few lines of a poem that might
Yeah.
inspire you for later. Sherri would love to see it, and we'd love to see it too.
Yeah.
But next question, Sherri. What's one trend, challenge, or opportunity that you see in the world of middle grade today?
Well, definitely, I know one challenge is the fact that our demographic, and by demographic, I don't mean the ages, but the number of people reading books at all. They keep telling us that it's shrinking. There's just doom and gloom. I personally don't follow that because I just think storytelling is as old as time. And as long as human beings exist, somebody is going to want a storyteller. And so I figure I've got that going for me. But just in the making the business viable, making the books accessible, that is a concern and a challenge for not just middle grade, but all grades. And a particular challenge I think that the middle grade has is the threat to public access of books. People trying to banish or ban books because it starts out and it's a lofty goal, and then people with agendas they pull in, and well, we don't like this, and we people with headbands, we got to get rid of those people. Oh, people with glasses, there's no telling what they're hiding behind those lenses, and pretty soon, you've only got this many people who are qualified to write. And so that's a real concern to me, that children who need books may be being denied access because of arbitrary restraints.
If you could travel back in time, what's one piece of advice that you'd give your younger, more creative self? If you start thinking when you're a youth, you just have all kinds of ideas and then they just all go together.
Well, I was fortunate because my mother loved to read, and we always had books in the house. And even when I was a young tween and she knew I was stealing her bodice rippers, she didn't really freak out about it because to her, reading was reading. I mean, you know what those books are, those romance novels. Dash, I love you from the bottom of my soul. And when you're 12, man, you're just lapping that up. Oh, she's in love with Dash. And, you feel incredibly grown up. My mother would stash them in these brown paper bags and stuff, and I would go in and steal them, and it was almost like a little game. She knew I was doing it, but she would tell me not to do it, but she knew I was doing it, and she never did anything to forbid me from doing it. So, all of that said, what I would go back and tell my younger self is don't change. Don't, you just keep doing what you're doing, because she always made sure that I had writing materials and reading materials. And I wrote every notebook for every school year. My lessons would be in the front and my novels would be in the back. I was always working on some type of novel idea, and would I would probably just tell my younger self, believe it, because it can happen. It will happen if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. The funny thing is, I just recently won an award, and I was telling my daughter. My daughter is 25, and we share a house together, and I was saying to her that this is probably the happiest I've been as an adult. And she was like, "Oh, mommy, I've never heard you say that before." And I was like, "Well, I think back to being that kid at that small, underprivileged, all black middle school where every skill in society was supposedly happening in our little ecosystem. Kids weren't expected to graduate high school. One out of three of us was supposed to wind up pregnant, or all of these kinds of things that just got fed into us. And through it all, my mother would just tell me, "Mm-mm, you're better than that. I don't bring that home. That we're not doing that." And it's one thing for your parent to say that, but as a 12-year-old, you have to dig deep to believe it. And I said, to be where I am now and to know where I came from, it's almost shocking. And at the same time, it's so rewarding. It's just like I can look at these other children and tell them it can happen. You can dream stuff. You can be a doctor. You can be a rock star. I don't know. You can have these big ideas and make them come true.
This is something that needs to be said over and over again, which is just the gift of motivation and continued inspiration, because we've spoken to quite a few people now, and we find, I think, a common theme is that people who write and become authors often had that in them when they were younger, that inspiration to create, but a lot of them get derailed, whether it's from life circumstance, or a lot of them just didn't believe that they had enough talent for it, or that they had to do other things. So just to hear, wherever you are, whatever age, you don't have to be a child, you can be an adult, you can remake yourself and continue a dream you had before. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, and I will tell anybody that I will take persistence over talent any day, because I also when I first moved to Florida as a newspaper journalist, I was a part of a fiction writers group, and they just so happened to have met in our journalism building. And I was awed by, these people, and I just thought everybody in the room was so much smarter, and you know and I think about all the people, and some, I'd say a good 20 people in that room were published before I was. But, what, 13, 14 books later, not all of us continued. Some people got one, two good books in them, and then the minute they got a bad review in the newspaper, or they lost their agent or whatever, it was like a roadblock that they just couldn't get around. And I had some pretty devastating things happen in the beginning of my professional writing career. Right at the point where I was starting, my mom died. A few years later, my dad died. I met a woman who I befriended, and she had a hot novel that was out for adult. And so she introduced me to her agent, and her agent was just scathing. I mean, just blistering. It has not been a just this straight trajectory where, oh, you just keep, and there are hills and valleys, and life happens. And I got sick in like 2005, 2008, and developed lupus, and I had to leave the newspaper. And a book that I was working on that should have only taken 6 months took 3 years. But you just keep chugga 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 chugga. You just have to keep the train going. You get derailed, you fix that track, you get back on. Chugga chugga. You just have to keep going, and those are the people who prevail. They're not always you look at you ever been talking to some friends and some book is hot and you know that you're being catty, but you look at your friend and you're going, I could have did that. I could have did that in my sleep. Girl, that book was, and I'm not gonna name names, but ooh, you know, but what did she do that you didn't do? Well, she wrote her book while you were just thinking about that was something you could do. This person actually wrote that book. So those are the kinds of things that we have to remind ourselves of when we get low, and what we have to remind others about when they look at somebody who's been churning for 20 years and finally has a bestseller and they see them as an overnight success. It's like, yeah, and that was a long night. They've been working on that success for about 20, 25 years. You know, they got it.
It's a crucial conversation. This is another just perfect reminder because resilience is a word we hear all the time, but it's not a practice that we often take part in because it's very difficult and we get knocked down so much. And like you said, you often see the success end and you see it flashing through lights and you forget the journey that it took to get there.
Yeah.
So
And we all do it. I still do it. I look at somebody, I look at Jason Reynolds and I think, man, that guy has more awards. I tease him when I see him in public. I'm just trying to catch up with you, Jason. I'm just chasing after you. But you know what? I bet he is writing all the time. I mean, honestly, I swear it does seem like he puts out like 4 books a year. I don't know, and 3 of them will win awards. I'm just saying, but he's a hard worker. He just keeps going. He just keeps going, and you keep putting it out there. Eventually, somebody's gonna buy it and read it. So.
there's their golden words, Sherry. Speaking of writing a lot, you have 15 books, is it? You've been successful. And this can be a difficult question for our authors, but what's one thing that you'd like your readers to take away from your work as an author?
Well, it depends on the book, obviously. I'm not somebody who deals with theme a lot. I've read that, if you go into your writing, into your project with a concept of theme, it makes the writing richer. But I've also been a part of, again, writing groups and such, where the concept of theme was crippling. So I'm just a storyteller. I've got a story to tell. I usually don't know what the theme is until the end. And it used to be my friend in the writers group, Joyce. She would be the one to tell me, "Oh, this is a story about identity." Uh-uh. That's a story about a girl who wants to make cupcakes. And it's just like, no, but that's the story and this is the theme. And so, but I will say that out of all the different themes out there, I probably do write about identity the most. Who you are and who you are and who is it that you want to be, because I think that that is at the core, especially when you write for middle schoolers. They're all, I don't know of a middle schooler who isn't on some level on a search for identity. And so I tell stories from that frame of reference. So that would probably be it.
We love asking that question because a lot of people will say, oh, well, I can't answer that because every book has its own theme, its own takeaway. And then we see all of you progress down to one thing at the end of the
Right.
day.
Yeah, it's all of that is true. I do know for a fact because I have actually I've had smarter people than me or wiser authors who helped me sort of break that down. And I do realize that the majority of my books are about identity, are about figuring out who you are in this moment, who you want to be in the future. So,
Well, Sherri, it's been wonderful talking with you. We hope that this has inspired some of our listeners to learn more about you and to hopefully take some inspiration from everything you've said and start their own books, maybe poems and books. We don't know. But Sherri, thank you again for being with us today. We are going to encourage all of our storytellers listening. Go to thestorytellershelfpodcast.com. Find that episodic calendar page and find our links so that you can see where to support us and our guests. If you enjoy this episode, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and share this with a friend because we know that other people out there could use this too. And one last thing, if you like freebies, definitely join us in our email newsletter. Pop your email in, it's for free. We don't spam you, but we occasionally send things like career opportunities, awards and contests, and handy dandy things like pitch guides and query guides that you might find very useful. So otherwise, we will let you go today, and we'll see you again next time.